The Kind of Man I Am at the DMV by Stacy Waite. Mommy, that man is a girl, says the little boy, pointing his finger like a narrow spotlight, targeting the center of my back. His kid hand learning to assert what he sees. His kid hand learning the failure of gender's tidy little story about itself. I try not to look at him. Because yes, that man is a girl. I, man, am a girl. I am the kind of man who is a girl, and because the kind of man I am is patient with children, I try not to hear the meanness in his voice. His boy voice that sounds like a girl voice, because his boy voice is young and pitched high, like the tent in his pants will be years later, because he will grow to be the kind of man who is a man, or so his mother thinks. His mother snatches his finger from the air. Of course he's not, she says, pulling him back to his seat. What number does it say we are? She says to the boy, bringing his attention to numbers, to counting, and its solid sense. But he has earrings, the boy complains, now sounding desperate, like he's been the boy who cries wolf, like he's been the hub of disbelief before. But this time he knows he is oh so right. The kind of man I am is a girl. The kind of man I am is push-ups on the basement floor, is chest bound tight against itself, is thick gripping hands to the wheel. When the kind of man I am drives away from the boy who will become a boy, except for now, while he's still a girl voice, a girl face, a hairless arm, a powerless hand. That boy is a girl, that man who is a girl thinks to himself as he pulls out of the lot, his girl eyes shining in the Midwest sun.
Mommy, that man is a girl, says the little boy, pointing his finger like a narrow spotlight. The poem opens with an apparent paradox. That man is a girl. When based on traditional logic, this is a seemingly contradictory statement. Man equals girl. How we interpret the perspective of the boy helps us to understand the intention of this phrase. Is the boy naive and unknowing, as small children often are? If so, it may be said that the boy's comment is wrong, confused by something he sees and forced to make an illogical observation in the hopes of getting a clear-cut answer from an adult. But what if we treat the boy not necessarily as purely naive, but more so innocent? The child has not yet grown, has not yet formed a complete set of ideas about the proper arrangement of the world. He's merely making an empirical observation about environmental factors. Based on his pre-existing definitions, the phrase, that man is a girl, is not to him wrong, but simply the best way of expressing what he is seeing, while being confined to his own terminology and understanding. Therefore, it is already here, in just the first 6 words of the poem, that the binariness of our language arises. Man and woman are often presented as clear-cut, black and white. When read through the lens of the boy's innocence, the poem begins by expressing the idea that gender is not merely binary consideration, but rather something that is complex and is difficult to describe in basic terms, as the boy tries to. Waite uses the simile of a narrow spotlight when describing the feeling of the boy's finger pointing at the narrator. This comparison emphasizes the feeling of being singled out by the boy. There is a sense of quiet. All focus is on the target of the light, and none is on the surroundings. Being placed under a spotlight is something that comes with the connotation of being watched, being observed whether you want to be or not, being the center of attention despite just trying to be yourself. This is exactly what the narrator feels. They are going about a routine task, the DMV, and are not in that situation extraordinary except for the singular matter of outward appearance. The narrator feels as though they are being singled out and watched for something that is ultimately unremarkable.
Targeting the center of my back, his kid hand, learning to assert what he sees, his kid hand, learning the failure of gender's tidy little story about itself. The choice to use the word targeting furthers the idea of a spotlight. The narrator feels singled out for simply being their routine self. The repetition of kid hand builds upon the idea that the boy is young and innocent. He's not at all wrong for questioning the world around him, for working to sort out what he sees. The word learning is also repeated as he's trying to make sense of his environment. Psychology says that humans will try to classify their environment based on understood prototypes. The boy likely has a basic traditional understanding of man and woman. Faced with an individual who may not present themselves clearly as either, the boy attempts to make a classification based on existing prototypes, but has difficulty doing so. All of this signifies the narrator's perception that the boy is simply unknowing, Not wrong for observing his world, but simply confined to a view that is different from the narrator's. Gender being said to have a tidy little story about itself is an interesting line. Obviously, gender is a concept. It cannot tell a story, yet it is personified to do so. It's a bit ironic. Rather than ideas being shaped by reality, ideas, according to this line, try to base reality on themselves. In essence, the narrator is mocking the concept of gender as to say, seriously, do you really think things are that easy and uncomplicated? This helps to develop an understanding of the narrator's internal perspective that gender is not something simple, but a complex construct, one which is difficult to understand and even more difficult to apply. When we take the opposite of the idea, instead of being a tidy little story, gender is more like a complex, long novel. We gain a deeper insight into how the narrator actually feels.
Because, yes, that man is a girl. I, man, am a girl. I'm the kind of man who is a girl, and because the kind of man I am is patient with children, I try not to hear the meanness in his voice. The words man and girl are repeated several times, as though they're going back and forth and over and over and over again. Could this signify the narrator's internal conflict? Well, besides this, the repetition of these words creates the idea of a swinging pendulum, or something that keeps changing in state, something which is never exactly defined at one point, like the narrator. The clunky, arrhythmic nature of these lines forces the reader to slow down and consider the back and forth, perhaps also challenging their own views in the process. It's like the narrator is forcing the question, can gender be both, or is it just one or the other? The narrator also further emphasizes the idea that the child is not malicious, but just innocent. They recognize the need for patience with children because children are still in the process of understanding their world. They're still in the process of having their views shaped and influenced by the environment. They try not to accuse the child, but they're still somewhat internally bothered.
His boy voice that sounds like a girl voice. Because his boy voice is young and pitched high, like the tent in his pants will be years later. Because he will grow to be the kind of man who is a man, or so his mother thinks. There is a great irony in the phrase, his boy voice that sounds like a girl voice. The boy, who has accused the narrator of being a walking contradiction, is not himself bound by his own prototypes of man and woman, yet tries to define his world as such. This is perhaps also a reference to the egocentrism of young children, where the mind seems almost to think, I am normal, it is others that are strange obstacles to my world. The child is able to recognize when someone else does not fit his understood conventions, but would never think to apply this logic to himself. Considering this idea in terms of the narrator's perspective demonstrates how they believe that they are being seen by others, strange among a sea of perceived normality. Conversely, this is the belief that the narrator has about society. What they are doing is normal, it is society's perceptions that are flawed. The simile, high like the tent in his pants will be years later, comments on the boy, i.e. traditional society's, perceptions on gender. He will grow into the kind of man who is a man, in the eyes of the narrator, in other words, one who conforms to societal norms. Perhaps this idea is an allusion to the medical procedures which alter the natural biology of an individual. Or so his mother thinks, is saying that the boy would never be like them, would never change what is natural like someone who does not conform to society's binary norms might. In the view of society and the mother, the boy is normal, the narrator is not. This may also provide an immense insight into the narrator's internal conflicts. Perhaps the idea of going against what is perceived to be normal, in lieu of parental and societal desires, is a lived conflict in the narrator's past.
His mother snatches his finger from the air. Of course he's not, she says, pulling him back to his seat. What number does it say we are? She says to the boy, bringing his attention to numbers, to counting in its solid sense. The mother pulls the boy to his seat, grounding him in her reality. The author uses a specific syntax to replicate this idea. Each line quickly pulls the reader down to the next, without any pause. Attention to numbers. The reader is pulled along like the boy. Also interesting is the line, of course he's not. Not what? The mother responds to a logical paradox with a statement of fact, which then comes off as also illogical. Of course he's not a girl, she essentially says. He's not a girl. The fact that her response needs to be said proves it's illogical. If binary logic and conventions are fail-safe in reality, then he's not a girl is not something which ever needs to be said. That being said, it proves that gender in reality is not a simple binary concept. Essentially, by attempting to combat the contradiction posed by the boy, the mother is forced to acknowledge that contradiction's existence. There is surely cognitive dissonance here. The mother insists outwardly that gender is binary, that a man is a man, and yet also sees internally that it is a complicated issue. She tries to maintain the perspective of a simple black and white system for her son, and yet her son triggered these conditions in the first place.
But he has earrings, the boy complains, now sounding desperate, like he's been the boy who cries wolf, like he's been the hub of disbelief before, but this time he knows he is oh so right. The poet alludes to the story of the boy who cried wolf, the well-known folk tale regarding a boy who kept raising the alarm over non-existent danger, only to be ignored when a real threat arose. When viewed through the narrator's perspective, this connection says that the boy is making a big deal over nothing, that the narrator is not in any way impeding other individuals, and yet is being put in a spotlight of perceived admonishment for their differences. Instead of being taught to turn his concerns to the real issues plaguing society, the boy is getting caught up in the conflict of what he sees versus what his mother tells him. The phrase hub of disbelief furthers the idea that the naive, innocent boy simply does not understand what he is seeing, and rather than being given explanation, he is simply dismissed and distracted by his mother. Him being oh so right connects back to the idea that he is trying to make all of reality fit into his binary prototypes. In this sense, if he is right that that man is a girl, then the narrator is in the wrong for being out of place, and the boy is right for being confused because of it. But on the other hand, oh so right reads more like a thought of the narrator than of the boy, as if the narrator wishes the boy could instantly understand the truth, that reality is more complicated than he currently understands, that he is right to question not those who fail to fit into his interpretation, but rather to question the interpretation itself.
The kind of man I am is a girl. The kind of man I am is push-ups on the basement floor. The narrator wraps back around to the concept which contradicts gender norms. The kind of man I am is a girl. They continue to defy these expectations by providing that gender is complex and malleable. These ideas and their impact on the reader are then tested. Push-ups on the basement floor is something which, according to the traditional gender norms, will more often than not have a male connotation. The entire point of the narration is to challenge this idea. Push-ups on the basement floor has no gender to it at all. Nothing to do with the characteristics of the individual. It is an action at a setting joined by a preposition and nothing more. By including this line, the narrator is furthering the idea that gender is a construct, something which is shaped by reality and not the other way around.
When the kind of man I am drives away from the boy who will become a boy, except for now while he's still a girl voice, a girl face, a hairless arm, a powerless hand, that boy is a girl, that man who is a girl thinks to himself as he pulls out of the lot, his girl eyes shining in the Midwestern sun. Rather than saying a boy who will become a man, the author says boy who will become a boy. Per the narrator's observations, the boy is not like a boy, but more like a girl. Would growth therefore be into a man or a boy? The point of using contradictory word choice here is to say that it doesn't matter. Boy, girl, man, it's not necessary to apply these definitions. You can simply just use descriptors, hairless arm, powerless hand, earrings, like the narrator and boy both do. The syntax of that boy is a girl, that man who is a girl thinks to himself is significant, tripping the reader up as they try to make sense of what was just said. The element of confusion here reflects the often confusing task of organizing reality into neat concepts, and even the futility of doing so. The fact that the narrator says that boy is a girl is a reverse application of the boy's comment that opens the poem. And it's intriguing and signifies the fact that the narrator ultimately is affected by reality's perceptions, and that they recognize that they do not fit into the tidy little story and are in fact trying to justify themselves by pointing out how others also don't fit. His girl eyes shining in the Midwest sun as a closing line conveys acceptance. The narrator understands that they do not fit into binary gender conventions and treats the combining of perceived aspects of both men and women into one as positive, not something to be frowned upon. Furthermore, the line ends on sun, and the sun can represent life, rebirth. It's also a homophone of son, and the poem opens with the word mommy. It could be an indirect reference to the fact that the constructs society builds are maintained because they are passed down through generations, and it's parents raising their children which will impact how society goes on to perceive those. who do not conform.
Irrational path. The crow, bold and cunning, glides stealthily above the forest floor. To the right, he sees wolves running, howling, each one louder than the one before. To the left, she sees rabbits hop, as if humming silently beneath the trees, and not one of them dares to stop, for they sense the predators through the gentle breeze. The wolves and rabbits glide down their separate paths. The curious crow cannot but seem to think, "Ah, but which shall I follow?" he asks, as the two further diverge, as their spectacle shrinks. "No," ponders the crow, "I can fly, and they cannot." And she takes the middle path above the two. Along they trot.